And yeah, so our guest tonight, Steve Scalone, based in Melbourne, is a commercial and travel photographer. I guess it would be a reasonable description of you, Steve. And
Yeah, yeah.
he's been around a long time, and he's done a lot of things, and he's won many awards. He's done plenty of exhibitions, and it'd be worthwhile jumping onto his website and having a look at some of his work, which is stevescalone.com. Steve's done some. I'm just looking at his awards now. Gee, there's quite a few.
So AIPP Travel Photographer of the Year, Steve, was one of them, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, Steve actually won the Book of the Year.
Yeah.
And I don't know how he beat Angie, but somehow did.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, Angie.
Photographer of the Year.
I was like, I thought you had it, Steve.
Wow.
And I don't know how many, and you've won quite a number of commercial and travel Victorian photographers a year, and even as back as far as New South Wales as well when you're up there, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where I was kind of doing weddings and things like that. Up in New South Wales.
Have you got any room left on the mantelpiece?
Yes, it's another. It's not that bad, but yeah, it's. I don't like talking about it. It's always a bit embarrassing, which is.
Sure. We all say that, but secretly it's like, yeah.
It's good. The validation's good.
So, Steve, you've also done quite a bit of presenting. I remember seeing you presenting at the NZIPP conference, the IRIS conference in New Zealand, and I know you're a regular at the WPPI in Las Vegas.
Yeah. I really try and who knows what happens next year, but really try and travel once a year and kind of. I love WPPI, love NZIPP. It's just they're awesome. So yeah, any chance that I can kind of travel. I'm off. I'm out there, which is good. Yeah, I really enjoy about that. I also teach as well. So
yeah, that was the next aspect I was going to bring up. So yeah, tell us about your distinguished educational career, Mr. Scalone.
Well, I started teaching while I was doing weddings, and that's coming up to. I think I started teaching in about 2008. And I really loved it. There was something back then was a huge challenge for me to kind of put everything that I've learned into words, but then still follow a very strict sort of curriculum and stuff like that. So I found it a real challenge. It was only ever part-time. It was only ever either 1 day a week, sometimes two. So being a wedding photographer, that was great because all your work happened on the weekends and then you retouched and that type of thing and did sales during the week. So yeah, they just worked really harmoniously, and I loved the satisfaction of teaching. It was great. Still is. I still teach.
Where do you teach?
So what sort of period of time is that, Steve?
So that's pretty much. I started a wedding business probably at around about 2000, so 2001, and kind of started to wind that down by around about 2012, something like that. So yeah, I was doing weddings beforehand, but never sort of my own business. So before that, I was working in commercial labs and kind of all film based. So E6, C41, all the good stuff.
All the good stuff. I remember.
Yes.
Can you tell us a crazy wedding story? I'm sure you got a few.
Yeah, there's dozens. Not without no. No, I can't. Yes.
We don't want to get in trouble with the law or anything.
Yeah, no, there's too many. I'm being very diplomatic here.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's a very personal thing, but I don't know any photographer that doesn't have an arm length worth of stories and close calls and quirky things and
almost always.
Just talking before the show, Steve was saying even though he doesn't do it now, he actually did really enjoy it. And to be honest, like even when I was working photographers, not everyone has that simple ease and joyfulness and around wedding photography. Most people see it as not quite the enemy to landscape photography, but as something just extremely challenging. And having done both, I can relate quite strongly. So yeah. What created that transition away from it then, Steve, if you did enjoy it so much?
Well, pretty much after the GFC, even though we didn't really have that much of a problem with the global financial crisis. The confidence of the wedding industry, at least in New South Wales, has sort of kind of diminished a little bit, and it wasn't quite right after that. The new generation of brides perhaps were being a little bit more fastidious. It just didn't feel right, and it felt naturally for me to move on. So that's kind of how that whole process started. And you can't just close a wedding business. It takes years, because obviously people that you book now are getting married like 18 months in advance and so on and so forth. So it literally took about 3 years.
Planned wind down. Gotcha.
Yes, yeah. So it was a very slow wind down. And even when I decided to make the move to Melbourne, I was still flying up quite regularly into New South Wales and finishing weddings and doing that type of stuff.
Yeah, it's a slow geographical shift as well then.
Yeah. No, but it was good. It was well worth it.
We're sort of, I feel like we're partway down the story already. We haven't got any, like, grandma gave me a camera stories when I was 6 or anything. Like, have we got a snapshot picture of where your passion for image making sort of came to fruition in the first place?
Yeah,
I haven't heard that story. I've heard plenty of other stories, and because I've known Steve for quite a while, but he keeps his cards close to his chest. I'll see sometimes.
Yeah,
a bit shy.
I gotta say, my story's very cliche as well. So, got a camera when I was very young. I actually got my. I was the only one that could use my father's camera, which was it was a beautiful German little Paxette. It was a rangefinder. It was 35mm. It probably was built in the late 40s, perhaps early 50s. So it was a gorgeous little thing. Completely manual shutter, leaf shutter. And I was the only one that could kind of try and figure out, you put a shutter speed with the right aperture, with the right film, and you kind of get a shot. So that started probably when I was about 10 or 11.
That's pretty young.
Yeah. And then I did a silly thing and started a dark room in my bedroom around about my kind of early teens. So,
the smell of chemicals to send you off to sleep.
Yeah, so even if I smell black and white, even today, I break out in some kind of skin dermatitis rash.
Oh my god!
Yeah, it's weird.
That's not cliche. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
dark rooms at that sort of age and starting at 10. I think I picked up my first point and shoot camera when I was about 21. So you're way ahead of me, my friend.
Okay, awesome.
Slightly late bloomer, but I guess the thread, I guess now, and a very simple thread is do you still have a similar level of passion for image making, like in terms of the principle and just the process of it? Have you sort of maintained that thread all the way through, you feel like, and what have you done to sort of maintain it, I guess?
Yeah. Oh God, great question.
That's a long career in image making, and obviously different aspects of it, from wedding to commercial to urban to education. But you've maintained a passion for the industry and the craft for that a long period of time. So what sort of fuels it, I guess, or keeps it running?
Well, what is really strange about my sort of career is that I've essentially had 3 careers in photography. So the first part of my career was almost all based around commercial labs, even managed like a mini lab, a beautiful Kodak mini lab in New South Wales. Did that for a little bit while still kind of fumbling around with photography and stuff like that. I originally applied for film school, so that was I was much more interested in IMAX and cinematography back then. I'm talking maybe 17, 18-ish. And of course I got knocked back because I had no experience, no decent portfolio way back when. It was a very tight industry back then, especially film. So I just kind of found myself in the kind of processing side of things. And that's when I did that maybe for about 10 years. And then I kind of delved into weddings by buying a pre-existing wedding business up in Newcastle, New South Wales. And then that sent me on a path to that, which was great.
So what sort of influenced your style of shooting over the years? That's a big, broad question, and obviously, as an educator, you probably reflected on that, and because you probably got to offer certain influences to your students as well. So as well as recognizing your own. I mean, we all have different influences. Some of them are personal. Some of them are way outside of this medium. Even some of them are actual people. Some of them are genre-specific experiences or professional, aspects. It's big broad question, but I'd love you to at least just touch on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my influences change. Well, they have changed over the years, but they kind of change a lot currently as well. So I get excited when I see different things, new things, and not necessarily photography, if at all, really. I was trying to. I kind of knew this question was coming because we chatted about it. I was trying to kind of write down some photographers' names, and I found it hard to kind of find any that I would say, yeah, definitively yes. So currently, Wes Anderson, huge influence just on his use of color and composition and everything that I kind of love and think that's natural. So yeah, his composition, the way he uses forced perspective, kind of getting that two-dimensional realm happening, I love it. His direction's also incredible because I have a strong interest in videography and cinematography and sound and all that type of stuff as well. So I guess I'm more attracted to influences of movies more than photography. So of course, favorites like Kubrick, Hitchcock, a lot of the lighting from the 40s and 50s in terms of movies, some recent cinematographers now today, Jeffrey Smart as a painting, even music influences. So I didn't know that other people don't see color or don't hear color, which is, I don't know, I kind of imagine that a particular set of sounds give off a hue of color in a way. So
okay.
that sounds a little bit crazy, but that's just another
so
process.
Have you had this chats with G Greenslade? I'm sure you might have.
No, I haven't yet.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen her translate letters and numbers into colors through different techniques as well.
Oh yeah, see, she's pretty smart that way.
She thinks outside the box, and to me,
I love that.
I've sometimes used sound to describe some of the work that I've seen or even produced myself at times, but not sort of in a very public kind of way or in a way that I can explain it.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to emotion and the mood. So if you hear, like you would instinctively have certain sets of songs, I'm guessing, that would set you onto a really happy vibe or a very kind of sad and dark vibe. So I would just translate those moods into color. And that's kind of how that sort of works. So sad is blue, happy is yellow, that type of thing maybe. Yeah, that's kind of how I've just figured out how to describe it.
I remember, I think it was doing some training with Les Walkling and maybe a few others. And his immediate suggestion when you're trying to look at how lighting's done well is go into the movie world.
Oh,
and just
God, yes.
and just dive deep and really look at the cinematography and the handling of light. And it's when you actually consciously engage with that, it's oh my Lord, you just think these people are absolute masters at their craft. And the kind of things we take for granted because there's a certain consistency at a high level in the industry that it almost just becomes an expectation unconsciously that, wow, the level of understanding and subtlety and craft is phenomenal.
It's really surprising. Like many times I've chatted with my students, it's like watch movies first to get the sound and the story and that type of thing. But once you're comfortable with it, turn the sound off completely and just look at everything visually.
Gotcha.
I learned how to light certain scenes, especially on the go for weddings, by just watching episodes of, I can't remember which one it was, but NCIS, I think it was the New York one. I'd never really liked the show, but the mastery that was there in the lighting was incredible for television show. NCIS New York, I think it could have been New York. It could have been one of them. Was just absolutely incredible. So check them out.
Well, I found that crossover really interesting when I learned that, say, I think this TV show House was actually largely filmed on 5D Mark IIs, like Canons. Like it was one of the first major TV shows, I think, that took on the really lightweight kind of hybrid world of using photographic cameras that had digital, that had film and video capacity. And that was the first time it opened my eyes to the fact that pretty much all of us now own machines that we're taking photographs with that are just as capable of producing really high caliber moving imagery. And I just put an R5, in fact, staring me in the face. Hello. and I'm just like, oh my God, I've got this like incredibly capable machine there. Although Luke will make jokes about frying eggs on it if you have it on for too long, but it's
we're not getting.
My point is, I haven't really made the most of the fact that I have the capacity to produce video, and sometimes forget, and I'm almost trying to push myself and train myself, and I'm wondering where you've sort of found that motivation and influence to actually not only enjoy appreciating the moving imagery, but actually applying it and doing it yourself. And have you been using like the hybrid kind of systems that we have, or do you have dedicated film-based equipment or video-based equipment?
Yes. So no, almost all hybrid. I did have videos way back when DSLRs and video didn't really exist, and that only came out maybe, well, at least to the prosumers or pros, 2001, 2002, somewhere around there. So I did have a video camera, and I was doing things like stop motion and stuff like that. But yeah, I've always been a sort of, I love technology. I think I do love film, and I love the nostalgia of film and the whole process. But to tell you the truth, I've had a go recently at shooting film again, and it doesn't excite me as the way it used to. So I'm sticking with Digi and kind of going at it that way. So it's one thing that especially with my travel stuff, I use the cameras as a tool. So I use a Micro Four Thirds. I'm actually filming on a little 1-inch Pro compact camera here, but then I also have a Z7 Nikon, that has the full frame. So I use them as tools. I'm not necessarily stuck to either one loyal brand or anything like that. However, having said that, I love Nikon. I've been using them since forever.
Right.
But I will.
Next on your team, mate. I'm the sole sort of cannon boy out of the crew.
It's not a competition. It's not, and so isn't.
No, they're all brilliant.
Except we have to fry our eggs in a pan.
Oh, you had to do it. He had to do it, Mr. Scalone. There will be repercussions for that comment at some stage. Steve, I'm wondering, I mean, you obviously had a natural passion for the film already, but in terms of I feel some pressure as a working commercial photographer that to maintain relevance in the industry, I need to be able to engage in the video aspect of work. And, I'm actually doing my drone license sort of this month as well, just partly out of a sort of pressure to keep relevant and keep widening my skill set. And when I sat down with Luke the other day just to edit what I thought was a simple video review, and 9 hours later we'd done like 3 minutes, I was just like, oh my God, this is the reason why I never got into it.
Yep.
And it's just, if you think editing photos is a time-sucking vortex, try editing video, and you won't have much hair left, I can tell you.
It's intense, and it's unforgiving too, completely unforgiving.
but do you feel like that is a pathway to maintaining relevance? It's becoming harder to sort of keep up there, and I don't know, you're probably a bit more connected in with the current kind of commercial expectations, because you're sort of doing that regularly and have done for over a longer period of time, and you're probably more aware of the trends and expectations that industry has.
So let's head back a little bit. So once I decided to sort of move on from weddings, I went back to being a commercial photographer, which I think I love the most. And I did that in a brand new town, Melbourne. And essentially, I've been doing it ever since. And I think I'm here in 10 years. So I've been here in Melbourne, I think 10 years this year. And all I do nowadays is architecture. So I rarely photograph people, even though I do have people on my website. I've kind of, I sort of have stopped that. I'm loving the whole idea of just photographing architecture. I do still have a few clients, a few PR agencies that I will shoot people with or for. But yeah, essentially it's almost all architecture now, which I love. So the expectations in that realm, and I'm not even talking about real estate. I don't do real estate that much, but just kind of architects, interior designers, office fit outs, so on and so forth. Almost all of them are hungry for content such as video, sound. Drone is hugely popular. And yeah, everybody is pushing for it. That started maybe about 3 years ago. So I kind of jumped on it way back then, maybe 4 perhaps. And it really has now developed into, oh, okay, you don't do drone work or whatever it may be. So they almost expect it, at least here in Melbourne. And it is, I think it's a really great way to upsell. I think it's fantastic. You start at the photography price. And
is that
it's
why
like,
you don't have any hair though, Steve? Because you spend all that time pulling your hair out trying to learn how to do all this extra stuff.
It's all about systems. So as long as you grab the content correctly, in completely clean white balance, the biggest painful issues that I've always had is an unclean sensor. Because what are you going to do with an unclean sensor on a video? You can't do much. Gotcha. So I'm more meticulous. So what I do at a particular shoot, let's say, for example, it's not residential, but a commercial shop, for example. So I'll go through the whole place and do all my photography. And then I bring my own sensor cleaning kit. And I'll meticulously clean that sensor into an inch of its life so that there's no dust there whatsoever. And then I'll go around it. I've got a gimbal, I've got a slide. Obviously inside I don't use drone. So yeah, I basically probably produce about a 30-second to 1 minute little montage of their property for them, include all their titles, the music, they license the music, so on and so forth. Yeah, and it's a fantastic upsell. Business wise, it's brilliant. And they're excited because it gives them content to use on the ever peer pressured platforms like Facebook and Instagram and all that good stuff. So yeah, it's really great for business.
I don't know. I just want to hold on to what hair I got left, Steve.
Systems, you got to have systems. So you've got to make it automatic.
Freak, aren't I, Nick? You just see my place. Systems everywhere, mate. System of a Down. That was probably about sums it up.
Yeah.
Nice.
Now, Steve, I guess we titled the show Urban Landscapes, and to me, for the time that I've known you, and the filter that I've viewed a lot of your work through is through the kind of imagery that you presented at a high awards level and the AIPP and NZIPP, and that has largely been around the street and urban photography. So I guess in a little while we should probably look at some pictures, but in the bigger picture of, I mean, why is it you're drawn to those in particular? To me, like, you have a very refined gift of understanding the alignment of geometric shapes and simplifying complex environments into really kind of bold, quite powerful compositions. The way you use people will be a really interesting thing to explore. And even though you're less away from there now, and also I guess your understanding of color is, to me, fairly unique as well. And the strength of how you tie the three together and get your sense of timing with people as well. So where did that kind of come from? Is that from way back? You've always had that passion? Is that something you've developed? Is that a newish kind of part of your 3-stage career, or tell us more about your passion for the urban world in the first place, I guess, visually.
Yeah, absolutely. So I pinpointed it back to where I wasn't totally satisfied in the weddings I was shooting anymore, because they were always a brief that I had to follow, even though I put my own style to it, which was actually really quite natural and free flowing. I very, very rarely show any of my wedding work nowadays. So yeah, not even on the internet. You can't. It's very hard to find any wedding work of mine on the internet, which is good. No, I loved it. I just don't want to be kind of booked for weddings, in a sense, much anymore. But yeah, basically, I guess going out into the street and started to photograph certain buildings and places was actually more about, there was no brief, there was no kind of client saying that they wanted this particular look. It was just all me. And that's what I found most freeing. I think that's where I actually found the passion again, because doing weddings in and out, day in, day out, week in, week out. I was actually up in Newcastle, New South Wales, and there's about 8 beaches there. So many brides used to come in and say, I want something really different. I want photos on the beach. And essentially that was
So
everyone. So it was hard to find exciting things, but I always used to push myself to try and convince a bride and groom to do something not wacky, but something a little bit more daring, not only for them but for my own creativity as well. And that always kind of pulled it all back down into a beautiful compromise. So by going out into the streets on my own terms, on my own time, and then incorporating travel with that, because I just rediscovered travel again and loved it. That's kind of how it all developed. And then I just loved form, concrete. I do have a little bit of a love for architecture as well, especially like mid-century modern, the brutalist sort of works and stuff like that. So the urban world has always sort of attracted itself to me.
What are the qualities about it in particular? Like, how would you sort of open that out a little bit wider and say, these are the aspects I'm particularly drawn to, or get under the hood a little bit?
Yeah. So as we were chatting before, I think I'm a failed landscape photographer. So because landscape has so much depth within it, and it definitely has, well, it should perhaps have a foreground, a mid, and a background. I just found all of those elements too confusing to place together into one 2-dimensional frame, where I just naturally found a nice progression where it's like, okay, straight lines, they go up at 90 degrees, there's a roof. Okay, that means it's a line. Let's call it a triangle. Oh, I like this. This is simple. So that it's really that's all I've got under the hood, buddy. I'm sorry. That's it.
Well, I mean, the greatest aim for most photographers in almost any genre is simplicity, Steve, and it's also the hardest thing to accomplish. Whether it's Nick trying to shoot a forest, God help me, I'll just run away from those with my tail between my legs, or it's Steve trying to delve into a complex urban environment and find these simple shapes and forms and containments. When you talked about those lines, I immediately thought, I had the feeling of containment. All right, that's my edge, that's my ceiling, that's as far as I want to go. That's one of my boundaries towards the simplification of this scene. Is where those lines are. And I mean, you do that amazingly well from what I can see.
Yeah, you see, I don't see them as constraints at all. I see them as shapes, as sketch. So one of my talks that I talk about is the gestalt theory, and that essentially is just chunking down really complex scenes into super simple shapes. And I didn't know I was doing this until I was invited to speak. I can't remember when, it was years ago. And they they basically said, we love what the type of work you do. Do you mind explaining a little bit about your process? And so I don't know. I just kind of point and shoot. So I stumbled across Gestalt and that kind of principle of simplicity and how that works. And that was the best way I could explain what I saw as a thought process. So, and that's essentially what I do. It just feels completely natural to me. I do have a very unhealthy take on using square a lot. So I almost always cut everything into a square.
I wouldn't say
not
it's
always.
This is part of your personal style, Steve.
Yeah, to me it just feels
You heard
natural.
of squirrels?
Yeah.
I know
Only
all
on
about
drones.
squares, Steve. I've had to go through the stuff you guys. I like squares.
Oh, squares are great. I love them. I mean, there is no wrong or right kind of side. There's no portrait or landscape. It's just square.
Well, I think it's probably a good time to actually maybe start looking at what we're talking about, Steve, and
Yeah, cool.
bringing it to life a little bit more, and maybe using some of these descriptions we've had and applying them, or looking under the hood of some of the images to bring it more to life. I listened to a podcast the other day. Actually, I did 2.5 hours this morning with Steve Arnold. Actually, we did 2 back-to-back podcasts, and I listened to one from Alex Noriega, I think, last night, and actually it was having like half an hour of just listening to this man with no visual cues whatsoever gave me so much more understanding about his work than actually looking at it.
Interesting.
Because
Okay.
I started to understand his way of thinking, his mindset, his background, his purpose, his influences. And it wasn't until afterwards that I could suddenly, all his work started coming alive for me in terms of how the thread that brought it together, and the aspects of what he was aiming to accomplish that weaved all the way through. And so I kind of don't mind, having a bit of time to delve into a person's sort of beingness around image making before we even look. I think it can add a lot of depth to when you actually then end up seeing it, or you
Yeah.
can see it quite differently afterwards.
Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely. So I'll share my screen. And I'm guessing you can see Lightroom.
Yep.
All good.
Is that correct? Yep. Lovely. So basically, at its simplest form, stuff like this. So what I'm showing is basically the layout of one of my books, and then the second one starts somewhere. Maybe not there. I'm unsure yet, so I'll get back to you on that one. But on its simplest form, like an image like that is essentially I don't even know if it's there anymore, but it's the tennis court at Mona. So it was I just stood.
Never would have picked it. Love it.
Yeah,
I probably stood in that very spot myself and never even noticed that shot, Steve. I'm sure. In fact, I know I have.
So a lot of the stuff that I do is using the lenses, using the tools as a tool, and zooming in. So most of these are taken on a mid to long telly, which of course then compresses everything. I shot a lot of this on a micro four thirds, so a Lumix GX8, which I've almost drove into the ground because it's such a beautiful small camera. It has a 12 to 100 millimeter lens on it. Is it here? The 12 to 100 isn't, but that's my little carry around. I don't use this much anymore because my Nikon Z7 is almost this size. It's only a little bit bigger, and yet it is twice or 3 times the resolution. But this is great because it's inconspicuous, it's quick, and it's light. So a lot of these shots I actually took on the GX8. It's a little micro four thirds, and a 12 to 100 equates to a 24 to 200 mil lens. And it's a sharp little thing. It's incredible. So I didn't have to swap lenses. Everything was quick. I zoomed in if I wanted to get a great shot. I zoomed out if I needed expanse and like an establishing shot. It was the perfect little camera, and it didn't make me feel really awkward with a huge SLR swinging around my kind of neck, where people are looking at me and that type of thing in the street. It just feels like I'm a tourist, and that makes me feel more comfortable and allows me to get these kind of shots as well.
So are a lot of your shots basically handheld then, Steve?
Oh, all of them, without a doubt.
Good question.
The only time I ever use a tripod is when I'm working. so when I'm shooting I shoot all my architectural work HDR, just as a process, and then I churn it all into Lightroom, and all of that, of course, needs a tripod for 3 particular shots to be mushed together. And HDR in the good way, not the bad way.
Yeah. And for that work, do you use tilt shift lenses or just?
I have done in the past, but I find that slows me down somewhat. And I don't do a great deal of exteriors. If I did a lot of exteriors, I definitely would use a tilt shift more. But I don't. So I have the equivalent, well, a 14 to 30mm Nikon ZS series lens and a 24 to 70. But essentially, for all my interiors, the 14 to 30 almost stays on consistently.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So
Is that like a 35mm equivalent 14?
no, it's full frame. So a 14, and I max it out to 14 a lot. So yes, and I have a not a motorized, a geared 3-way head. So I get absolutely everything as parallel as I can, so that there's no distortion there whatsoever, which saves me time. The only thing that I do, even if it needs it or not, is HDR. Like I mentioned, I do an auto stack in Lightroom, so it puts them all together for me, and then I select all, I press Shift Command H, which does an automatic HDR on all of them. I go away, I have a cup of tea, come back, and they're done. Then I've just got to crop them to suit, so on and so forth.
So basically, the commercial work that you do is a fairly different style of shooting than you do when you're doing your urban landscapes.
Very much, yes. And that they exist independently. The wonderful thing is, I've only started putting on commercial work on my Instagram account, which is pretty much the only place I put work up, apart from my website. And I have attracted new clients because of my street work, because of the way that I see. Normally, if somebody is after a more conventional or traditional way of representing their work as either an architect or an interior designer, they're not convinced that I'm good for them. But if there are architects or designers that are sick of the kind of common, let's make this place look like a CGI render, then they kind of are tweaked by the way I see things, which is great, because that gives me a little bit of a point of difference. And yeah, I could kind of go from there. So I've managed to do the actual stuff that I love without a brief, and then create a brief by that, which is cool. That's kind of what I tried to do, I think, for the first 20 years of my career, but didn't do that. So only now have I started doing that, which is good. I enjoy it.
Steve, do you crop to when you shoot, or do you leave a little bit of breathing room?
I actually,
well, obviously shooting square, unless you've got to do some cropping, but just in general.
Yeah. So basically, any mirrorless camera that I use, and I use mirrorless entirely now, I set them in camera first and foremost. So these are actually shot as square, and then of course these are shot as maybe a 3x2. Something like that. Huh. So I actually do, and these were actually shot on the Nikon. These were shot on the RX8, the little Lumix.
I'll have to think about the next time I'm up in the plane, Steve.
Oh, absolutely! It completely changes your viewpoint, your thought process if you crop in camera. Now, the beauty of cropping in camera with at least the Panasonic is I can get a little bit of play if I wanted to. But with the Nikon, if you didn't crop with the Nikon, but if you did move into the 1:1 with the crop as a RAW on the Nikon, it actually does throw away those pixels as a 3x4 or
a square or
3x2.
I actually find that a weird thing that Nikon's done there, because I know Canon, well, I'm fairly sure Canon don't do that, though. If you crop in camera, you can recover the full 3:2 later if you need to.
Yeah, I don't really mind. If I'm switching to a 1:1, it means that I'm essentially composing into that 1:1 format anyway. If I did, most of the times, I will actually, because I have a very unhealthy habit of doing this, I will crop something like this into a square anyway. And that's usually what I do. So I would get rid of that dark spot, bring that down, keep that up, done. And I would just keep it as that. So to me, it doesn't really matter. It just gives me the freedom. The good thing is with the grid lines, they pretty much do come in as a 1:1 ratio as the grid. So I can use that at times.
So yeah, I mean, to me, Square is a fantastic tool for enhancing geometric strength. It really somehow it just emphasizes a lot of the shapes of what's within it. Somehow, it's kind of one of the things that I find, because obviously I use it a lot in my aerial work, which a little bit different in that the shapes are often more organic and less linear. But at the same time, when I have sort of looked at your work in particular, it somehow emboldens all the shapes and the other geometric elements that are in there.
Yeah, well, I think no one's talking about the best bit, where you don't have to turn your camera to portrait ever. That's the best bit.
Is that a personal dislike, Steve, is it?
No, not really. It's just one less thing I have to think about.
Yeah, there's a certain simplicity. Well, you think about Cartier-Bresson, he just walked around with his camera sitting on his chest and didn't even look through it.
Yeah, exactly.
He wasn't shooting any portraits, that's for sure. A lot of the time. Steve, I'll go back a step. Like when I think about Bresson, I think about a lot of the great street photographers and their time. And yes, that's also inclusive of the people element. There's a certain, I guess, comfort level, I think, where, I have such an admiration for people that can be in that environment and keep shooting and find a way to be invisible enough not to influence people or to handle or hold themselves or project themselves in a way that they're sliding through rather than bumping heads, if you know what I mean. Like at certain times, and I don't have a small camera, so that's probably part of it, is people feel intimidated or like there's a privacy issue. You'll get security guards coming up to you, and particularly, it's a no-brainer when you pull out a tripod, you're asking for trouble. And it helps to be without it. And obviously a lot of the great street photographers use those smaller, more portable kind of systems as well that were a little bit unassuming. But how do you carry yourself, and how do you manage that kind of aspect or find the confidence to embolden yourself in those environments when you might come across that?
Yeah, well, I'm not actually one of, I'm not a street photographer that focuses much on people. So I tend to use my images as people as placeholders. So we'll share my screen again. So for example, and let me know if you can't see my screen. So for example, with a shot like this, now this is all the... So this was, even though it was in the States, I think this was LA, yes. This was 6:58 a.m. It was not 7 a.m. It was probably closer to, I don't know, 5 or 6 p.m. I just didn't change my clock. So from there to there, it was only like a couple of minutes. But essentially what I did, and you'll notice that I'm actually across the road. So what I did was actually find a spot where I found, number one, the light to be the most interesting, then followed by the background. Once I kind of got those two elements, then I'm thinking, okay, what lens do I use? What focal point, because it's all one lens for me. What focal point do I use? Where do I want to be? And then just take a test shot, which is essentially what this is. And then I wait for, that was a little bit too bright. So I took another shot, got it ready for people to walk through. And then I'm just playing with how the light reflects off them. I'm not changing anything anymore. I'm just now waiting. The stage has been set, essentially. So I'm just waiting for people to come through. So I'm moving along. I'm seeing.
Are you using a burst mode there?
No. These were kind of all single shot. They're probably I would only take photos when something's happening, essentially. So this car, I think, got in my way. How dare they? But then I started playing with, okay, what would a car shot do, and to the shape and stuff like that. So that's all. I'm just playing. And, this only takes a couple of minutes before I move on, because when I'm usually traveling, there's just so much to do, so much to see, that I've got no time to wait. And I think that's why I revel in the awe of landscape photographers so much, because to get that beautiful shot, they're essentially there either an hour before, 2 hours before, or they've hiked to get there. Essentially just that perfect moment, where for me, the perfect moment is now. If it's not here, well, then it's probably around the corner. And that's my thought process. Which makes it great for traveling, I think.
Steve, do you have to deal with any lag with your mirrorless systems in terms of getting that really bang on timing?
No, not at all. Not at all. And if I did, like the GX8 probably has, like, in milliseconds, a bit of a lag. But because I'm used to it, I know exactly when to take the shot. I also, you'll notice with a lot of my work, not always, that's just proven me wrong, but you'll notice that with all of this, that I'm almost always getting the triangle of the people walking. So with their open stride, and all I'm doing is just counting their rhythm. And then as soon as they take their next step, that's when I photograph. That's when I press the shutter. And then that will always ensure me of that triangle, which is right or wrong. It's just the way I like it.
It's an interesting word, rhythm. I think it can be applied in a lot of different photographic sort of styles and approaches.
Yeah.
You can have rhythms of color, moving from one to the other. There are rhythms of people, rhythms of shape. And again, you were insinuating about your relationship with sound and vision. So you just kind of did that through that word, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't mention this before, but I'm a bass player, and I have been for like 30 years. I have a little bit of involvement with sound engineering. So, which is why I love video production so much as well. So there is that part, which I forgot to mention. So I'm a terrible bass player now, but I used to be good. I don't practice much anymore.
You're keeping everything at that very simple level now that I know you're a bass player.
Exactly. Oh, you must be a drummer.
Oh, no. No, I'm not a drummer. But I sing a lot.
Oh no! So we're not going to turn this into a slinging match. But the only thing that you pack up is your microphone at the end of the night.
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't even need a microphone.
Oh, nice. Good comeback. Yeah, so yeah, I used to play gigs and do all that in my 20s, maybe even early 30s, stuff like that. It was fun. It was good.
Do
Yeah,
you
but
think
it's
that
interesting.
there's an unconscious spillover from music into the visual world, like for you?
Oh,
Like,
God, yes, absolutely. The odd thing is, I could never actually do, and this is definitely just a me thing, I could never actually practice photography and practice music at the same time. It was kind of like it needs the same amount of brain space. Yeah, so I could never do both successfully. So I kind of had to put one on the shelf or the other for me to kind of really focus into it. So yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. I find exactly the same thing. I'm either in a photography mode, and I'm talking about weeks and months worth, or I'm
Yeah.
in a music mode, and I can't seem to do both well at once.
Oh,
So
cool.
it's
I found
interesting.
somebody else.
Yeah, no, that's it's interesting. I just tend to focus on one or the other, and I can't cope with trying to be my best at one and trying to be my best at the other at the same time.
Yeah, I do feel like it takes that same amount of brain space or that brain energy to kind of put your whole 110% into, and then yeah, it just can't cope with the rest,
It might
basically.
it might just be that we're both men, and there are a lot of women out there going, "Oh, I can do everything at
Yeah,
once."
exactly. Yeah, and that is very yes. That's a very strong argument.
Steve, I'm curious about that word you've used, placeholder for people. I mean, what does that actually mean, and
Yeah.
what do you think is the importance of people? And as you're saying, maybe less know right now, but I've certainly seen a lot of your work that I've engaged with. People have been a really important aspect of, even if they're only making up a small area of frame, it's quite a crucial part of the narrative.
Well, here's perhaps a really good example where if you didn't see that person there, then you wouldn't really kind of place everything else into reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So as soon as you see this human, this person walking, on the ground floor, then you can understand that this person would roughly be around about, 150 to 2 meters tall. They're about, this wide. They have two legs, they have two arms. So we all know what a human kind of looks like. So that's what I mean by human placeholder. If that wasn't there, then these tiles that you see perhaps don't really have that much of a scale. You would be hard pressed to even feel that they were glass banisters. But now that you can see that the person's there, then all of a sudden we see that it's in a built environment. We have the glass banisters, or we can now only assume that they're glass with banisters and that they're about, waist height, so on and so forth. And then that's how that reality sort of seeps in. So that's what I mean by human in terms of place holding. So, and I guess this one's down to a very obvious one, but it's more, it doesn't have to be human. It can be, oh, I've lost it now. I just saw it. Can be a bird. So that kind of, it's not, it only, it's not just a placeholder, but it's also a focal point. It's something that gives the whole context, subject, and stuff like that. And we as judges in any sort of competition look for that, perhaps, if it's for that. Does that make sense, or am I now just rambling?
No,
Yeah,
makes
no,
perfect sense.
I'm still yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, I guess, there's a level of anticipation, I guess, with some of these, like,
Oh God, yeah, absolutely.
and
So
I guess the pre-visualization aspect of it is, we sort of alluded to that already to some extent, about setting the stage, and then waiting for the curtains to lift type thing. There's a great Matt Palmer quote from judging about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I set myself up to win if I can if I find a great little spot like this where the light is just falling on the wall beautifully, but I also know that people are walking past there all the time. Well, then my chances of getting something of interest or taking something of interest goes up. But if I just left it like this, it's still a nice photo, but is it as dynamic as that one, for example, which is the one that I ended up choosing, and so on and so forth. So, and yet again, photography is so subjective. Like, you might actually like the one without the human in it. Whereas I think this one gives it context. He's kind of mirroring, or, the figures on the wall are mocking, perhaps. There's some weird, very thin narrative in there. It is a very thin narrative.
Oh,
but
it's not so thin.
But it's just fun. It's just playing with color and light. And don't get me wrong, not every shot or not every scene works. So there's many times that I've sworn under my breath where it's like, oh no, you've just gone the wrong way. How dare you? When a poor person who has no idea that I am actually photographing them from across the road, for example, just, took a left instead of a right. But I feel uncomfortable when most of my photographs, you can actually recognize the person. I actually much prefer them as darkened silhouettes like this, or something where they're not sort of recognizable as much as possible.
Yeah, I didn't notice that. There's a sense of voyeurism a little bit around your work, and the people are more symbolic than literal.
Yeah, and
or figurative anyway.
Yeah, and I guess that there is a certain amount of moral or ethics, and the questioning behind, should you even do this in terms of, public spaces and stuff like that. And in some countries now, don't quote me on it, but I think in Germany, perhaps, it is actually illegal now to take photographs in the street of people, even if it's in public places.
Yeah, that's a bit of a nasty precedent.
Yeah, I guess Nick being a photographer and engaged with the law, and yourself being a street photographer, like what's the current kind of status in Australia around that?
As far as I know, as long as you are not on selling your image to third parties, like for entities, because then you would definitely need a model release and so on and so forth. It is legal to photograph people in the public arena for your own use, such as your own books, prints, exhibitions, so on and so forth. But you can't.
Is that relevant to whether they're recognisable or not?
I think so.
Yeah,
and yet again, that's where that level of ethics come in. Like, to me, I would find it kind of a little bit uncomfortable if I ever had an exhibition and somebody said, that's me in that photo, how dare you? I would feel crushed. I would just want to die. It would not be a very nice situation at all. Because that was never my intention for the actual image.
There's been controversies elsewhere with that sort of thing. I believe there's some really aggressive street photographers out there that really get in people's faces and produce a style of photograph it's very intriguing, but you have to wonder a bit about the moral compass that's associated with it, because it is I've seen videos of it occurring, and it's quite confronting.
It's very aggressive, yeah, and that's just not me. That would make me feel uncomfortable if I was presented in that situation. And I would probably react quite aggressively towards it, especially being a photographer as well. I guess it all depends. But then, is it valid? Is it a valid form of art? And I would say yes. But that moral compass is really the only measurement now, essentially. And in terms of
Yeah.
ethics and stuff like that. Me personally, I would find that very uncomfortable to photograph, so I don't, basically.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you ever
Yeah,
do
no,
any? Sorry, Paul, you go.
no, you go, Nick.
I was going to say, do you ever do any? How to put this? Posed street photography, where you ask someone to walk in a certain direction or past it or pose in a certain way, and then
No.
no,
No,
it's all
especially if they're a,
spontaneous.
no, especially if they're a stranger. Absolutely not. No,
No.
I would find that more terrifying than anything. Yeah,
Yeah, I guess I'm not really asking about a stranger, but would you bring a friend along and say, "Look, I've got this idea for a photo." So it looks like a street photo, but more of a pose sort of.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've done
Something.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've forced my partner to go up and down stairs before and stuff like that to pretend they're walking up and down stairs. Yeah, yeah, I have done that.
Is there a bit of a I know there's all sorts of snobbery in different genres of photography. Is there a bit of a purist street photographer sort of thing where I'd never ask someone to do that. It's all spontaneous, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's exactly the same realm as single shot landscape and open composite landscapes. Like, how far do you go in terms of all photojournalism and, reportage?
Hmm.
So, how far do you really kind of go in terms of keeping it pure? And is that okay if you set a scene up or whatever?
Hmm.
To me, it's all about the design of the image, and it's interesting you say that because there's certain competitions, photographic competitions, that I like to enter because number one, it keeps me sharp, and it kind of personally excites me to keep doing what I'm doing and pushing the boundaries. There are certain elements in a lot of these photographic competitions that won't allow you to do certain things. So you've got to play by those rules. But when you're out there, yeah, basically I don't mind if I have to add certain things now, like birds or take birds out or take street lamps out, so on and so forth. To me, it's all about the finished product and the design of it. So whether anybody agrees with that or not, that's, I guess, what makes us so different, which is good. Difference is good.
It is. It is absolutely.
Yeah, I can see how that would influence, the different competitions that you can engage with, because a more purist traditional competition wouldn't allow that, for instance. But
Yeah.
whereas something like, well, it depends on the category. Like an APA, you can't do that in the travel category, which you've won at a national level, and you can do that in the landscape, for instance, or
Yeah, absolutely.
illustrative, or so you can sort of fit your work in relative to the criteria that you're operating by.
Yeah, and as what I do when coming up to a print competition like that, I look at my images and it's like, that's not good enough without me removing something, so I can't enter it in travel. I'll have to enter it in landscape open, for example. So I look at the work that I've shot and then kind of like, oh no, I don't have anything. So, and then you start making decisions that way.
It's interesting. I know we're not talking travel photography specifically, I suppose, but there's also been that fairly recent, I suppose, exposure or controversy of set up travel photos. The sort of the you know the I can't think now, but a lot of stuff in Asian countries in particular. What are your thoughts on that sort of thing? The birds, the eagles in Mongolia and that sort of thing.
Oh, okay. So, are you talking like National Geographic or like a news report, photojournalism?
Yeah, well, yes, well, yeah, more, yeah. It's often called travel photography, but the boats. I can't even remember where it is now, where You got the local people on boats.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I can't even think what they're called.
I can think of a few examples. There's the cormorant fishermen in China, which is a common
that's
one.
It. Yep, that's the one. That's the one I'm trying to think of.
And I've seen interesting shots where like you'll see the photograph and it's this woman and child, and it's all beautifully lit and seems like quite an amazing moment. And then you'll see a back shot, and there's 24 people on a workshap sitting there taking the same photograph that's been set up for them, and that they're basically paid models.
Yeah,
and then that's entered in the travel category. And there was an image like that I think won like $100,000 or something.
Oh,
wow!
wow!
And it was a setup shot just like that in a competition, and it won a huge amount of money. And it caused a lot of controversy around the ethics and morality of travel photography in general. And it does have an influence. It's on my mind when I travel. When they're used to tourists or their hands out asking for money, and is it actually supporting them by maintaining that, or is that a graceful exchange? In terms of travel, I guess you'll focus more on the urban aspects of travel, even when you travel, Steve. I think, but
I would.
It is interesting. It would be nice to hear your opinions on all that.
Yeah, look, I would be definitely. I would be looking at my own moral compass and my own ethics first and foremost for that. And then, like, for example, if I was a photojournalist, purely documenting the news and or kind of current affairs, then nothing, I feel, should be set up. Of course, but bear in mind that absolutely, as soon as you put your camera up to your face or look through the viewfinder, you're altering reality to a very large degree by what you're actually showing or omitting or whatever. So it all depends on how far that kind of moral compass kind of goes. But as soon as you lift that viewfinder up to your eye, you're already turning a 3D world into a two-dimensional flat piece of rectangle. So you have already altered. Having said that, though, I don't think it's right if you're exploiting anybody or anything to get your message across further. So if there's exploitation involved, then no, that's not cool.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't
you
very
are, you are asking
enough.
The controversy.
Well, I just thought it might be something you were familiar with, because there's been some recent talk about that particular stuff, these set up shots, and then people specifically going there and big groups, like Paul said, and taking these pictures and then entering them in competitions and stuff. So that was that's what I meant.
No.
I didn't realise you weren't going to be familiar with it.
No. Clearly, I'm living under a rock.
It was a little while back. There was a lot of talk about it, but I'm sure it pops up fairly often. Anyway,
I think. Well, I keep it simple. If it's harming people, then no, you should not do it.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few grey areas in that one, I think. Like I remember the last time I did a decent travel where I wasn't actually working and didn't have an agenda. It was through Vietnam, I think, for a couple of weeks, and I sort of felt it was the first time, because I didn't have any pressure to produce any images, I actually put the camera away. I noticed that uncomfortableness of just putting a camera in people's faces and trying to capture all these moments, and I thought, well, what am I'm kind of taking from these people? I'm not necessarily giving back.
Yeah.
There's an aspect of world travel that's been there for a long time. And I remember having a chat to what's his name, the guy that runs the Lonely Planet Imagery, famous travel photographer. But anyway, his job is traveling around the world non-stop. And particularly going to places that are off the beaten track and ahead of the curve. And he runs the image library as well now for Lonely Planet. And he was like, I just don't have time for that. Somebody wants money, I'm not going to give it to him. I don't want to get into that dynamic and exchange. And he'll just race through, and he's got a job to do, and he's very focused. He's very quick. And there's other people, like I'm quite intuitive and sensitive to people, I guess, and a bit of humanitarian. So I'm conscious that there's an exchange with taking an image of a person, whether it's conscious or not.
Mm.
It happens. You're asking or taking something from them, and what are you giving back? So I guess personally, it's important to me that I might, if I go, last time I went to Tunisia, I spent a lot of time learning some language, and I
Yes.
might have hired a local guide so I could have conversations with people, and I asked them, how's your family and what do you do? And, oh, look, here's a picture of my family, back where I
I
come
love
from.
that.
And
Yeah.
would you like a picture of your family? I could find a way to give it to you. And I'd create this sort of process of meeting together and joining together and offering a way. If I ask something from you, I'm happy to give something back. And
Yeah.
as much as that's a very slow process, it's a very beautiful one. And that's a lot more what my approach is to that kind of travel photography. It's been very conscious of, and sometimes it's a moment or a nod or a smile is enough. Somebody's like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
happy enough. That's fine. Or you just point to your camera and point to them. And if they go, oh, okay, then, and if not, then be prepared to walk away.
I
Then
love that.
then there's the supposedly chicken style where you away the back somewhere with a 300mm lens and shooting the crap out of everyone without them even knowing it, which is different again.
Exactly. Yes.
And in some ways, your style is a little bit like that, Steve, and that you're far enough away that people aren't going to know you're taking the photograph a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But yet you're creating images that aren't really requiring deep, revealing of their personality and their intimate kind of world. They're a shadow or a silhouette, or you can just see the back of them. And so I feel like you sort of sideslip that issue to a lot of extent, and it's almost respecting that potential of otherwise to a certain level anyway.
Yeah, because and I think that's a really good word that I didn't really think of until now. I do respect other people's privacy in the street and things like that. And I guess selfishly, I'm not wanting to capture their emotion at all. I'm not interested in how, their emotion essentially. I'm just interested in them being a human ruler. Essentially, yeah, basically.
Well, it's funny you say that, Steve. When I look at your work, I think, oh, this is the work of a designer or an architect or or somebody with huge influences in the design world. And because your images are so beautifully designed, and that's so much the core of what they're about. And that people are just an aspect of design rather than a focal, like a an emotive kind of in your face, engaged, intimate kind of level. That's quite the opposite.
Yeah. And I think really all I'm focusing on is, and at the same time, I love getting comments like, for example, if this isn't in a competition, say, oh, this image doesn't have a narrative, or it doesn't really have a story, or I can't understand the narrative of this. And it's like, that's perfect. That's exactly what it should be, because my images don't necessarily, they're never meant to have a kind of narrative as such. The narrative is either color or texture or shadow and light. The narrative could be light and dark. It doesn't necessarily have to have a middle, beginning, and an end as such. It can just be an image. And that's what I enjoy.
So we've had a request off YouTube to do just that, to see more images, and I feel like we've a tiny little taster of the catalogue of Steve's work, and we're a fair way into the show. So let's let's play.
We're gas bagging too much. I love it. So, well, I'm going to be guided by you. What does anybody want to see of my work? Because I do have a lot of it here. Perhaps even in the form of the books.
Yeah, let's go through that, mate. That looks fantastic.
So essentially, I was fortunate enough in 2017 to win the book AIPP Australian Book of the Year Award. And it was actually a book with a whole lot of images mushed together.
It was like almost like a portfolio, wasn't it, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. It
sorts.
was really quite big. I think I've got it over here, but it didn't really make sense. And that was thankfully a lot of what the judges were talking about. It's like, and in a case of a book, I do feel that it needs a narrative in this case, but it's a much larger narrative. It either has a narrative of color. So that we have two bits of color that's actually starting to play and joining these two images together. They're both very high key images, yet that blue is tying them together. And perhaps that is just as far as that narrative needs to go with this. Likewise, with this type of stuff. We have repetition of diagonal lines, so that's why I thought that these images could work together well on a page. Likewise with this, people on stairs. That's as far as the narrative went. And I don't know. I'm just kind of. There really shouldn't be reading much more into that. That I'm kind of a simple kind of guy, which I like.
Do you ever listen to the judges judging your work in AIPP and stuff, Stephen, and have a bit of a chuckle when they try and find a narrative that you just don't think's there?
Oh, I love it. And Mr. Paul Holan is the worst at it.
You said it.
He will find something here like this poor woman is in a straight descension, straight to hell, so on and so forth. Because she's going in a down direction.
Oh, you're going to let me have fun, Steve, And
I love that. I love other people's interpretation. All I saw, honestly, is, cool creases in the concrete. She's wearing red. That's awesome. Click. Move on. And it really is kind of that simple.
She's descending into her subconscious after reflecting on her personal power, which is symbolized by the red, Steve. Did you know that?
I now know that, yes.
I'd be interested to know how you go about teaching narrative, Steve.
Well, me too. No. Apparently, I can get myself out of a narrative problem if needed to be. But with stuff like this, you can see my narrative. I think one of the really important things about us as photographers being storytellers is making it really deliberate to the viewer what the photographer is trying to say. So all I'm saying here is that I like green and orange. Essentially, the colors have matched. I feel like they can work together. They're taken in completely different parts of the country. They have no relevance of any kind of correlation at all, apart from texture and color. But if that's deliberate enough and you can see that at first glance, then I think that is the narrative.
Yep.
I don't know. It shouldn't be, And likewise, little pops of red. And obviously then, the more you look at my work, it's like, oh, wow, he really is kind of simple. And it's like, that's good.
I equate simplicity with mastery, Steve.
Yeah. And I think it's... So, especially with stuff like this, where, like, what makes a person or a photographer decide to turn something into black and white or, use different parts of the architecture and so on and so forth. And it's just a discovery of moving around and things like that. So it's all about playing. And that's what I loved most about stuff like this, where I didn't have a brief like, okay, we have to go to the Botanic Gardens at 2 p.m. or worse still, at midday in summer, purely because we have to be here at a certain time, there at a certain time, and you just have to make it work. So already you've got all these restrictions pushing down on you which is why off-camera flash is so beneficial for situations like that. But when you're just out and about walking or traveling into an environment that you've never seen before or just only discovering, yet you can actually find little bits and pieces that actually make it work. I find that far more satisfying than sticking to somebody else's brief, for example. And I think that that's why I loved it so much, or still love it so much.
Yeah, I guess you got to be a lucky person to find an avenue where that is your approach, and that's what puts food on the table and makes you healthy living as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Commercial photography is all about someone else's brief.
And I got to say that I did stick to my guns probably a little bit too stubbornly about Instagram, because I wasn't really kind of pushing getting clients and that type of thing. But I was just, any kind of images that I took when I traveled, I just put onto Instagram, and then started hashtagging certain elements of the industry. Then I started noticing a pattern of the inquiries that I was starting to get were ones that were perhaps not, that they were definitely looking for something different. So inadvertently, I kind of found a way to do what I love and then actually attract my clients that also love what I do, basically.
So I've already seen 2 images the last 4 that I've judged at a national level. Do you owe me any beers, Steve? I'm trying to remember.
I'm not sure. You have probably, created some convoluted story to them anyway.
Oh, I'm sure I was going for gold, Steve. I'm sure.
As you always do, God bless you. Yes. So yes, I'm going to say I owe you at least a dozen beers, I guess. Whether you
I recognise the one on the
or not.
right. I remember having a pretty long argument about that one, and the page before, the one on the left, with the 1, 2, 3, 4, and the figure coming around. I remember arguing for that as well. That was a while ago. That one.
Ah, yes, yeah. Do you mean the one with the cello?
1 page back on the left.
Ah, 1 page back on the left. Oh, yes, that one. Yeah. So, yeah, actually, I think you did thank you.
There you go. Couple. I'm counting, Steve. I'm going to go through the whole book.
I know,
See how many you owe me.
So one thing that I really love, and I don't get kind of precious about my photography at all. I don't know. I just don't. So the one on the right here, which is the cello and the woman walking, this actually sparked a bit of a debate by my 2 heroes, which is David Oliver and Peter Eastway, because they were both judging this at AIPP. This would have been maybe 2018.
Yeah, no, I remember.
I can't remember.
I think I was on there with them, I think.
Yeah, I think you were. Yeah. One, David Oliver absolutely loved and totally saw what I saw. And Peter was just like, it's photo. And it's like, I love that. I think that's the best. I think it's great. This is probably the closest that I would have ever gotten to the decisive moment where I saw it all coming together at once. Because the actual cello observer was looking through a closed shop, looking at shoes, but she was like shifting her weight from one side to the other. Yeah. So the cello was kind of just doing this, but her legs were kind of doing that as well. Meanwhile, I saw the actual woman a little bit further up, probably about 4 or 5 shops up. I was like, oh my God, I can see this working. Like, she's dressed completely in a dark black kind of attire, and then we have this really odd, weird shape with this cello. And so, yeah, basically, I saw it all coming together. I don't know whether I kept it in here, but the reflection of me is just like with my mouth open, and you can actually see my reflection in the actual window. And I'm dressed like a complete tourist, like t-shirt and crappy shorts because it was hot. It was actually quite warm, and I'm lifting the camera up here, looking down at the little viewfinder. So it wasn't pretty, which is probably why I darkened it to the point where you can't see me. But yeah, so that probably is where I just saw it all coming together. where mostly I kind of set it up and watch it happen. So all I do is just look for shapes. It really is that's all I do. And I use the simplest form of, if it's a bunch of trees that sort of look like a rectangle, then I just call it a rectangle. I don't see.
So if we go back one, where are the hands coming from? What's the narrative there?
So that is the topography of terror in Berlin. So that it sounds really ghastly, and it looks really ghastly. But all it is these two beautiful old ladies. That it's a museum, by the way, and it is based around the history of Berlin and all of that. But basically, these two were closing up for the day, and they were just about to open the doors when I took that shot. So they,
Clever.
yeah, it was just base. It was an odd structure. This gate, or these two doors, were kind of quite solid, but then after that, it was almost just like slats, like a cage. And I'm thinking that was the architect's interpretation of the museum and things like that. So I saw these two past the cage or the gates, sort of approaching. So it looks like everything's still, but this was taken probably in like an nth of a second before they opened the doors and then left for the day. So it even got white knuckles. It's, yeah. So don't believe any photo that you see. Yeah. So that's what that was. And yet, strangely, I've had comments on that one before. It's like, this looks like a serious image of oppression and, being locked up and things like that. No, it's just two beautiful old ladies going home.
Yeah. You can see why they get that impression, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess that's a beautiful way to prove that, like, as soon as you take that image or as soon as you look into a viewfinder, you're altering reality because it's just an nth of a second. Kind of heading back to that whole debate about the ethics of setting images up and things like that.
So Steve, I've often wondered about the physicality of you taking photographs like this. Are you? It looks like you've got your camera out on a freaking pole, so you can get perfect top-down images. Because unless you're hanging in the air or shooting through a glass floor, you're not going to get that perfect perspective. So tell us how you pull it off.
Yes,
or maybe you can hide it and just laugh at us gleefully.
No. So I don't do this much anymore because I think I've done it to death. But essentially, as soon as I ever walked into any sort of shopping centre or internal building, I'd look straight up and look for any sort of balcony or banister or second floor with a balcony, so on and so forth. So essentially, I could just go up and then look down. And I tried to figure out why I did this. And all it was because it simplified shapes. Because I'm now looking down, a very complex shape like tables and chairs just turn into rectangles and sort of half circles. A boat now just looks like an arrowhead or a bullet instead of like an elongated point and all that type of stuff. Like with this one, and you wouldn't have noticed it until I've now mentioned it, that's the actual glass banister that I'm leaning over and getting in the shot. So if this was clear, you would actually see my feet there, if that makes sense. So I'm safely leaning over, and I'm probably doing this as well.
Oh, you are. I was wondering about that.
Yeah. And likewise with that. So I'll look and go up to the first floor if I'm traveling or casing out a spot. And this is all like, just calmly. I treat this like relaxation in a way, sort of fishing. Not that I fish at all.
Leaning out over objects and wide open public spaces. That's the curious way to relax, Steve. I know plenty of people that would not find that relaxing.
Well, finding shapes in an urban environment, that's what I find relaxing. Let's put it that
You,
way.
you haven't had any punk kid come up behind and give you a little push?
No, thankfully not yet.
Yeah.
Although New York, I reckon they would. Native New Yorkers would do that.
Yeah,
God bless them.
they're tough, New Yorkers.
They are. Yeah,
Just,
so
They're awesome, though.
I was going to say, just on that, the simplifying and the shapes and the beautiful shapes and all that. Have you ever shot urban decay, or is that removing, the rusty bits and pieces and the graffiti and the weeds coming out of concrete, and or is it something you shy away from because it introduces that sort of chaotic element we're talking about with traditional landscapes, I suppose?
I love it. Yes, that's bang on. So the latter. So I have shot. Now I love the idea of urban decay, but as something that I enjoy to photograph, no, that's probably a perhaps not on that. I have done like kind of shot inside abandoned buildings and kind of parks and stuff like that, and I love the mood and the feeling. I found it as difficult as if I was to photograph something landscape wise. So I found it perhaps too chaotic. And you can actually make, if I find a scene or an environment too chaotic, the first thing I do is zoom in and then focus on, I guess, stuff like this, where I'm just focusing on a little bit of a pole or, a corner. There was a stage there where I was photographing every dirty corner, like in a back alley or something like that. But it will literally only be a couple of steps and literally that corner, not the doorway or anything like that. So I don't know whether I've got any of that, but I would do that if I found something quite interesting regarding that sort of decay. But the whole essence of graffiti and stuff like that, I usually find tagging like just not nice anyway. It's not attractive to me anyway. And to me, I would just want to try and get rid of it as a post-production thing if it was in there. And for a lot of clients, I've had to do that. So maybe that's why I'm a bit bitter about that. Because they want pristine. Not as much for me. But yet again, I've seen some work. There's a couple of guys who I can't remember, and a wonderful, wonderful female photographer that goes out and delves deep into really photographing decay, and they do an amazing job. And it's like, wow, I wish I could see what you see when you're kind of in that situation, because all I see is essentially decay, but I can't make sense of it. Where they've made amazing sense out of it.
Steve, one of the things I really enjoy, if you go, say, just upper left at the moment, there's two next to each other that have a very creamy kind of grey with a hint of blue. Up a little bit. Next one up. Yeah, that page.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, one thing that struck me about these two together is that that beautifully subtle separation of tonality. I think it was page before. Well, that as well, but the page before in particular.
There we go.
It's like, is it an HDR technique? Is it how do you sort of manage that beautifully finessed kind of subtle and elegant separation of tonality that feels so deliberate and controlled and yet is actually really subtle?
Okay, so I'm going to give away. So I have noticed that there are a couple of my ex-students in the audience. So, and hello to you. But I'm going to give everything away now. So a lot of my students know me as Dodgy Steve.
Oh.
When it comes to Photoshop.
That could be taken. Yeah, I was going to say, glad you said that last sentence, Steve.
So the reason why that is I've been learning Photoshop since 2. Photoshop 2. So, and that was like, I'm really showing my age now.
That's a long time.
That was like 1992. So that's the first kind of iteration that I learned at college of Photoshop. And it was essentially like Windows Paint. It was that basic. But ever since then, I really loved the use of Photoshop and things like that. So when I take photos, and I learnt this in the wedding game, I know that this isn't the answer that you're expecting, but I promise I'm getting there. When I did weddings, there wasn't really services where I could outsource. Only as I was starting to think about changing my career, there was sort of outsourcing and things like that. So I was doing perhaps maybe 20 weddings like retouching 20 weddings at a time, happening at all different stages and albums, and any kind of busy wedding photographer would know the pain. So I got very good at making things look highly retouched, however, were done very quickly. So what I mean by quickly was like 30 seconds or less, maybe even a couple of minutes, something like that. A couple of minutes would be like up there in terms of time. So with these, I essentially work a lot on the one layer, and people like Angie would just freak out because essentially all this is stripping away by the Dodge shadow tool. It's stripping away the shadows selectively to kind of bring all that kind of lightness out. So that's all I'm doing with both of these. A lot of the times I'll use levels, but actually use the output scale down the bottom and strip away the blacks for something like this. And then maybe bring in a little bit of the blacks on the histogram, perhaps bring that up to a 10 or a 14 for those of you that love the numbers. And kind of that's how you get that creamy sort of look. But it's like done, next. So obviously for awards and prints, I spend more time on that, but usually not much more. It's usually more about getting rid of things like camera dust and stuff. So I understand Photoshop very well. I just don't love the whole process of delving into thousands of layers and 12 gig files, Angie Connell. Very bad. 12 gigabyte files. Yeah. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, well, not being much of a Photoshop user, I'm with you. At 30 seconds is usually my tolerance limits for working on an image. I'd rather be taking photos than sitting in front of a screen, but at the same time, yeah, I might do a little bit more around awards time as well. But as a judge, I've had to learn to appreciate when it's done well, and I like to investigate and go under the hood a little bit so I can understand a technique and how it's being applied, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to me, the ultimate, regardless of technique, it's really boils down to the communication and the impact that it has, which is really not necessarily relevant to the technique. That's just I think as a judge, it's important to have an idea of what's out there and what people are doing so you can understand their process a little bit more and reflect on how it's been done.
I think it really starts with what you want to do to the image first, and then figure out a way to do it to get to what's in your brain out. So that's
said.
I think if you're missing on that point, then you're getting bogged down on the lack of visual communication within the image.
Yeah, I'd love to see the rest of this book, Steve. I'm getting.
I know we'll eventually get there.
So no, we're in good time, but
this is great.
I mean, they're two of my favorites. I think that creamy palette really does it for me. I guess it's because it's not something I've done in my work, but I really admire the people that do it well.
Well, and you'll notice that it's completely different to that, which some will say, and I can't really bring these up for some reason. It just doesn't go there.
Just go forward or back, I think.
Yeah, Oh yeah, actually, yes. So obviously this is more contrasty and has deeper colors and stuff like that. But you can see how simple my thought process is with this. It doesn't have a narrative at all, apart from tone, shape, or color. That's it.
Well, I mean, how do you apply a narrative to this sort of work? Like that first light collector book we did that Nick probably is familiar with, and I don't know if you've seen it, Steve. It's all really, it's purely abstract landscapes of one place, and it's like, well, how do you create a structure and a beginning, middle, and end out of that? We couldn't even name the images. So again, we ended up just using we ended up using a rhythm of color, almost like a sine wave, where there was a hint of blue in one shot with a hint of yellow. Then we moved into more yellow images with a hint of orange, and then we moved to the orange images with a hint of red, and we created this almost sine wave of flow that was almost like a subconscious flow, really, because people wouldn't necessarily notice it straight off the bat. But it is a curious process, you know, and there's something you're particularly good at, and having a lot of practice at, is collating larger bodies of work and bringing them into book form, you know, to a point where you're acknowledged as, you know, with the best book in the country in the AIPP. So it's something you do well, and it's really interesting, sort of hearing your process of pairing in particular, and then the bigger picture of not only pairing but beginning, middle, end. So that's why I'm sort of keen to look at the book all the way through, and then maybe reflect on the bigger picture as well of what you put where and why.
Yeah, absolutely. So while I am flicking through this, I'll explain the process of how I got to this stage. And that's essentially, like, you'll notice now we're going through a white stage, and it's completely white all the way through, at least for like 14 pages or so. So what I ended up doing was printing all of my images that I would think that I would want out physically on like 3x3 inch sort of little place cards.
See another few beers, Steve.
Sorry?
Another few beers have come up.
Another few beers. Oh, why is? Oh,
Once
okay.
he's judged.
Oh, no way. Oh, did you judge those too? Yeah. They're oldies but goldies, these ones.
Yeah, they
are. Okay, add it to the invoice.
And just so the audience knows, I had no idea these were Steve's, by the way.
Good on. Well, yes, let's hope so. That was like 2014 I shot these.
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't think I even knew you back then. Not sure.
Probably not.
So essentially what I did was print out all my images and stuck them to the wall, and I left them there. I used to have like a really large bookshelf, and I basically stuck them to the back of that, and I left them there for months, probably 3 months or so. And you know, every now and then I would just live with them and then look at them and say, okay, I don't like you anymore, you're out. And, you know, or you'd swap, or you say, oh, okay, yes, you're great to be a full page, for example, so on and so forth. So, and I did that literally for, I'm going to say about 4 or 5 months, and you just kind of lived with it. And that's...
It looks a bit motor-esque, that last one.
Oh, it was. Yes, it is. That is
yeah.
motor.
Well, yeah, I thought so. I've never seen that sort of colour rendition of it, though, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is in there. There's a little bit of, you know, gentle massaging in... this technique is me swapping over to the lab mode, and then screwing with the channel A and channel B, and then bringing it back into sRGB. It's great. It's great for landscapes.
Yeah, it was an old landscape photographer's trick, that one.
Yes, yeah.
Oh God, I've never even heard of that, guys. So there you go.
But
I think I first.
Really, but your colours are so rich. I mean, that's what I thought you would be doing.
Oh, you should see the places I fly, mate.
Well, yeah, there is that too. That's actually gaining great content. So yeah, it was a huge process, and yeah, it's the only reason these books happened was because I promised it, and there was a deadline, basically. So when there's a deadline, it's like hell or shine, you have to make it happen, and thankfully it did, because I have And yet again, I teach my students this now all the time. It's like perfectionism is going to paralyze you without a doubt, 100%, all of the time. So, yeah, you need to commit to something and make it unavoidable. And then that way you will find the best result for it. If you're waiting for the perfect sunset or the perfect bride or, you know, the perfect street, it's just never going to happen. So you just have to work through it all the time. So yeah, perfectionism, I've learned, is it's okay to be a little bit more beers. Really? How many images do you judge?
Quite a few.
All of them. All of them. He's judging all the time.
And these are all discovery. It's like, holy crap, he's taken that too. Damn it.
So did you, is this a one-off, one copy book, or was it a run of books? Or
it's a run of books, and I did 300 sets and have sold all of them. Well, I've got two left. But I am going to do another run of these. So that's, I've totally broken that now. But that's them there.
Oh, fantastic.
So they were 11 by 14s.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's the first one. Because I got myself into a little bit of a trouble and had too many images that didn't make sense if I put them all into one book. So I introduced volume 1 and 2 at the same time. I don't recommend doing that.
I was going to say that's a recipe for lack of sleep, if ever I heard
Oh
one.
my God, that was not good. But yes, so I am going to end up doing another run and it'll be available again. But yes, basically I sold out. And I released it in 2018, the end of 2018. And yeah, thankfully they all sold, which is great.
Were you using InDesign, Steve, or how did you put them together?
Yes, using InDesign, and got them printed overseas, but not as an offset, as kind of still digital printed. Yeah. So I started the realm of trying to get them published, but very quickly I found that I was reaching too many roadblocks or too many obstacles. And even if I was starting to go down a particular road, I would have to compromise and that type of thing. Mm. So I made, yet again, stupidly perhaps, made no compromises and kind of did it my way, stubbornly a little bit.
Sounds like a typical photographer, mate.
I know, right?
And you were happy with the colours when they were printed?
Yes, so I have a box full of proofs, like different, like I was trying out smaller books and I didn't like them being small. I tried, yet again, stupidly, I tried having one book on one side and then the other book on the other.
Oh, wow, you really gone for it, Steve.
I did, yeah.
Did you try a pop-up book? Open it out into three dimensions?
See, so all of these images are upside down. I don't know whether you can see that. But they only make sense if you turn the book around. So I tried all sorts of shit. Yeah, and settled on the 1114s because I'm stubborn.
Very good. It's a beautiful looking set, mate. Really beautiful.
Have we only seen book one, Steve?
Sorry?
Have we only seen book one?
Yeah, this is the start of the second book.
Oh, I'm just getting started, folks.
Settle in.
I'd love to move through this one while we're talking. That'd be great.
Yes, cool.
So how would you sum up the second book? Like, obviously, you've shifted straight away into a long black and white series.
Yes, so this is definitely more grungy. So the first book was more minimal. It was cleaner. This is more, I guess, a typical street.
A bit more organic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it is kind of that little bit more street-ish. And I do take photos like this as well. Almost always on travel.
Looks like those kids were stoked getting their photo taken there.
Yeah, so
Steve, when you take these images that are a little bit more present and close to people, are you doing the Bresson technique where you're just shooting like from the hip without looking through, or you just through the viewfinder the whole time, no matter what? Or
not normally through the viewfinder. A lot of the times looking
just using the
down
back of the
because
screen?
it's a reticulating screen.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I guess now more times using the actual viewfinder at eye level. But because I'm using a smaller camera, it tends to be less kind of problematic as well.
More unassuming. Oh, beautiful reflections. Oh, too fast, Steve.
Oh, sorry. I'm really conscious of time. Like,
That's right. We've got at least another 10 minutes. So.
Oh, cool. Wow. So, yeah, this is... And the actual book that won 2017 Photo Book of the Year had all of these images mushed in together with the very clean ones in some sort of kind of format, but still not enough to say, oh, okay, this is deliberate. And that was one of many comments, which gave me the idea. It's like, oh, okay, holy crap, I either cull literally half the images or I create another volume. And that's essentially what I did. And then sold them as
I mean, that's an example of using the awards process and the feedback element of it, to evolve your work.
Oh, yeah, so beneficial. It really was. And, you had like essentially my heroes actually talking about this and commenting on it and things like that. Unfortunately, I was judging at the time. These were getting judged. But Libby from Memento, who's amazing, a huge advocate for book printing and kind of keeping this genre alive and kicking, especially in Australia. She was madly taking notes for me and stuff like that, and I love that. Now it does.
I remember I was watching her.
Yeah. And so now, thankfully, it actually gets recorded. But back then, I don't think it was. So yeah, really beneficial to hear the judges' comments, and they all made complete sense. It's like, of course, yes. So I actually it was a very strange experience. I actually had a chat with Martin Parr when he came out. I think RMIT organised him as a speaker. For those of you that don't know Martin Parr, he's a Magnum photographer and quite controversial in his time because he essentially broke the mould in terms of sort of documentary photography and stuff like that. And I was given the job because I was, at that stage, AIPP Victorian president. I was kind of chaperoning him back to his hotel room. And we had a great old chat. And basically he just said, which I still live to now, it's just like, just fucking do it. Can you just do the book and then talk about it later? I think that's great advice. Sorry for swearing there. I don't know whether this is a kid-friendly channel or not.
Oh, you just stuffed our YouTube, mate.
Oh, no. I'm so sorry. But that's essentially what kind of pushed me into doing it as well, which is kind of cool.
It's amazing the difference between the first book and the second book. I mean, obviously that's deliberate, but they're almost two completely different styles from the same photographer, if you know what I mean. If we put those both together, I might not pick that they're both from the same photographer.
Yeah, absolutely. And
another beer.
Sorry?
I had a good crack at this one on the right. I remember fighting for that one.
Oh, thank you. Another beer. Good Lord.
Jeez, I'm going to be absolutely toast next time I see you, Steve.
And then that's the last page of that one. For some reason, it's bringing up the other one again, but you've seen those. So strangely, that was the comments of the judges too. It's like these images don't sit well with one another because they feel like they're from two different photographers. Bear in mind that these images were taken over a 6-year period as well. So my style had changed throughout all of this. And of course, I was only photographing what I was presented with as well. So it's not like I actively went out to look at this car park, for example. It's like I stumbled across it and it's like, okay, how am I going to make this work?
So it's almost like a retrospective pulling together, isn't it? Rather than
Yeah.
a goal-orientated, targeted approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Sounds like every time I try and enter something in the awards, I'm like, oh, what have I shot this year? I can't even remember. Better start having a look. And versus other people that literally spend the year sort of refining their 4 images to some extent. Totally different approaches, and they're all valid.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I love about the actual uniqueness about all of any photographer and what they practice. I think we all find our own rut. A rut isn't a bad thing, by the way. Right? It's kind of a rhythm and kind of a process that, if it's just right, motivates you to actually keep doing it and keep doing it more and things like that. Until you, of course, you get sick of it. And then you are actually in the rut and you need to find something different to start working with. Yeah,
Steve,
so
how do you this is sort of changing tack a little bit from where we've been at, but I sort of feel myself near the end of the show sort of coming back to that bigger picture. You work with students a lot in a very, very fast evolving industry that is not the same industry that it was 5 or even 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
How do you sort of engage them with the bigger picture of the industry and the likelihood of them forging a career in it? And it's not an easy question to answer, but I am kind of curious because you're put in that position probably quite regularly, justifying the education that you're doing as well as the course's sort of existence. You must have to fight for that on a political level to some extent. I know we've lost a lot of our photography courses here in Tasmania that has gone altogether now. Relatively speaking, just a little bit going on at the uni here. I think the TAFE course has been totally wiped off the plate, and it's sort of, I get asked that a lot of times too. I want to get into it. I want to make a career. How do I do it? And it's kind of like, dude, the amount of full-time photographers out there has just been, narrowing by the day almost, it seems, in the last 5 or 10 years. And if you look at the membership of the AIPP 10 years ago compared to now, I think it was about 80, 90% full-time to now about 20%. So it's sort of, it's not about the industry dying. It's about, I guess, being relevant or understanding where it's going and
I actually
present with it.
I actually think the industry is healthier than it ever has been, to be really honest with you.
To elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think never more has it been a time to evolve as quickly as you have to. I saw the film transition into digital. I was a lot younger and I guess a lot sillier back then, but I was very much an early adopter because I could see the potential. I knew of this technology existing, like digital, existing in the 70s and, that it was the way of the future and so on and so forth. Of course, the reality was the quality of what was introduced way back when was horrible until probably about 5 years later, where it started at least starting to match film. But I saw many businesses go under in the domestic market, like portraiture and weddings, because they not refused, but just didn't feel like it was necessary to engage in the digital revolution, essentially. And this wasn't that long ago. This was like 20 years ago. Let's call it 20. So unfortunately, those entities don't exist now. And a lot of them have to do with mini labs and not just photographers, that whole sort of chunk of the industry. And I was a large part of that in the 90s, being part of the kind of color management and labs and stuff like that. So the same thing is happening now. The same thing happened with 35mm and medium format back in the 70s, and 35mm and Polaroid back in the 70s. Like when Polaroid was introduced, it's like, oh, cool, this is the way of the future. It's right here now. And other people were saying, that's not photography, so on and so forth. So it's just other things that are disguised as the same thing, essentially. So I do explain to my students that, yes, there is a saturated market, but there's new parts of the industry being born all the time. Like social influencing, for example, whether you love or hate the term, it's an industry now. It's a billion-dollar industry. And it's something that had not existed 10 years ago, for example. Don't quote me on the numbers, but you know what I mean. So, and there's going to be brand new industries that we would not have even heard of in 10 years' time. And that could be, who knows? Like, I already know that augmented reality and, virtual sort of scenes and that type of thing are being developed to the point where they are becoming a little bit more mainstream. Very simple things like IKEA now are starting to implement their furniture into very simple apps to get you excited. It's all a marketing tool, of course, but so are catalogs. So it's all just developing and adapting. So there's always going to be work in the imagery scene, more so today than ever before, because everybody, including my clients, they're starving for content. They have to get new content every week, otherwise they're irrelevant. And that's a great opportunity for us as photographers to kind of tap into that somehow. I haven't really quite figured it out yet myself, but to kind of tap into that and build a new realm, a new business. So no, it's exciting times. It's great. Gone are the days of the science and the chemistry and all of that type of thing, where you're not a real photographer unless you mix your own chemicals and things like that. And I'm talking the 60s, 70s type realm, who I have so much respect for, because that's where I was that's where my headspace was. It's like, oh, if only I could mix my own chemicals, I'd be a real photographer. But now, of course, that's all changed. And I think that's the really important thing. You change and you'll be fine. That was a ramble. Sorry.
No, that was one of the most powerful things I heard all night, Steve. And I'm a really sort of terrific way to round out tonight. I think it's for someone who's been in the industry for that length of time and is, has a responsible position for, mentoring people coming into it. It's a great question to ask someone like yourself about where it's heading and how do you maintain that sort of positivity in what's going on. And I feel a bit uplifted by that, apart from my complete embezzlement with video editing. I'm just like, oh my God, no, I just don't want to do it. It's for the next 2 years trying to figure out how to edit properly, but
baby steps.
Yeah, no, it is. It's constantly evolving, and it's even hard to keep up with what's coming around the corner. And there's definitely a level of excitement about that, and a lot for younger people with more plasticity in their brains to get stuck into.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, absolute pleasure, Steve. I don't know if there's anything else particularly you want to cover or share, but
no, I feel like I'm rambling so much, so I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. That's what you're here for, mate. That's why we have 2 hours, and we're lucky to have those ramblings, and they've been recorded for all eternity for others to enjoy. Steve, we've talked about books, and we've talked about some of your work. Where would people sort of, if they wanted to follow up with you further? And we haven't even gone into it, but I know you've produced quite a lot of video sort of work as well. To give people inspiration. Is that all? And I know you've just released just this week, even I think a fresh new face to your website.
Yes, absolutely. So you can check out my commercial work at Steve Scalone, SCALONE.com. And literally just yesterday, I've started selling a product range of my images. They're not really based for photographers. They're more based for the mainstream, but this is my way of adapting to the industry and kind of getting myself involved into a little bit more of that realm. So that
I don't quite understand that, Steve. Just quickly, not photographers but mainstream? What does that mean?
Oh, so it's just basically homewares. So I'm selling small sized images that could, you don't need to be a photographer to enjoy them, basically. So yeah, they're just kind of, and they're really affordable. I kept that on purpose. They're all open editions, so there's no cut-offs in terms of numbers or anything like that. They're all signed as well, so it kind of makes it a little bit of a hybrid in terms of a collectible and or not. It's just more quality control. But yeah, check it out. It's scalonecollection.com or smallartphoto.com.
Awesome.
Yes.
Fantastic. I think your students and clients are in very good hands, mate. So
thanks, mate.
Yeah, well said. Well said, Nick.
It's been inspiring, to say the least.
Cool. Awesome.
I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone. Your images are fantastic, and I've really, really enjoyed it. For someone that really doesn't see as much urban landscape stuff or look at as much as I should, you've really inspired me to get out in Hobart and see if there's something there for me to shoot. I'm sure there is.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing to do is look down at your shoes, photograph what's right in front of you, and then slowly bring your camera up. You're going to get much better results that way.
Oh, that's a good tip. I like that.
Yeah.
I don't want to see my shoes, though. I've had a hell of a lot.
No, don't photograph your shoes. Just what's around.
See, I've had someone already ask about maybe trying to get a hold of a copy of the book one. Do you say you're out, or where are do you have copies of version 2 available still, or
no, they've both gone. Unfortunately, a lot of the books were sold as sets, so they both went together. This was way back when, but I promise I am doing another run. It will probably be closer towards the end of the year. It's a fair bit of expense, so I've can't do it just yet. But yes, I'll definitely check out scalonecollection.com. Make sure you subscribe for newsletters, because I will be look at that shameless plug. I love it.
Oh no, it's a complete open. You've gifted us with all your time, Steve, and it's the very least we can do is give people more avenues to connect with your work. That's what we're here for, my friend.
But essentially the short answer is the books are coming, but unfortunately they're not available to purchase yet. It'll be a second run.
Stay tuned.
All
right, people are already on your website already, Steve, so stay tuned. Well, thanks again, Steve. It's a real privilege to have someone of your caliber to come on the show, and he's such a master at his craft, and is so kind of well entrenched in the industry as one of the key players, and being one of the absolute gentlemen in the community. You know, and I've been around the community for a while, and I can smell out the good ones, and as someone I've been to Pickle, I know he's a good egg.
Are you saying I smell?
He's a good egg.
Thank you, Paul. So are you.
All right, well, keep well, Steve, and all the best. And thank you again. Thanks, everyone, for having us on the show. Somebody asked if Luke was safe. As far as I know, Luke's fine wherever he is.
And we can do it without you, Luke.
Yeah, this is my training wheels episode. It's the first time we've done all the tech stuff without Steve, and
you killed it.
Touch wood, I haven't ditched anything. It should pop up on YouTube after this, but a few less hairs, a couple of extra greys in the beard here, trying to figure it all out. But so Lukey gave me a bit of training, and next one on the Padawan trail.
Yeah, I'll have to learn. Pull my weight a bit more.
I love it. Awesome.
All good. All right, keep well, everyone. And next week we're heading to the Northern Territory, I believe, into Darwin, and then the week after that we have and I will put it out ahead of time, because I really want to get the reach a bit wider. We're having a very special panel on the role of photography and well-being and mental health. And we've got Adam Williams and Ricardo de Cunha and William Patino coming on, who are all kind of individuals that have found the courage to share some of their story in that kind of world, in terms of their challenges and vulnerabilities and breakthroughs and we want to look at the sort of positive and challenging aspects of being a creative in a commercial kind of world, or just that aspect of dealing with sensitivity and mental well-being, and how photography can serve a positive, supportive, healing role, as well as the challenging aspects of dealing with social media and other parts which are part of the industry, and just having a really open conversation around that, and hopefully kind of giving us all more opportunity to reflect and be more empowered, and less feeling alone with the issues we're facing, and just sort of coming together to support all of us in that kind of journey. And I think as creatives, it's just part of the deal. We're sensitive people, and there's an up and down sort of process to it all, and let's just have a good chat about it, I reckon.
Yeah.
And then after that, we have Ken Duncan. Which is going to be, if you had any time with Ken, it's wow, anything could happen, and he's a heck of a character, and he's easily one of the great figures in modern Australian photography. So we're excited to have him. I think he's coming on the 4th, I think, of November. So Lucky and I knocked heads and decided to get a bit ahead of time, and Nick as well, about getting ahead of the game a little bit on the curve with the photography. And as the world opens up, we'll probably get a little bit of, it's the first show that Luke's missed, I think, and in 24, I don't think I missed one yet, but that might happen a little bit more in the future as work open up, and because Luke and I are normally traveling, doing a lot of things. So part of me being here tonight, taking over the technical, is to handle that for the future. And as I was talking to Steve earlier, I think it was Steve, we might actually start on the odd time creating a recorded episode with someone from overseas or internationally who can never make this sort of time slot, and maybe pop that in at a time where we might be out in the field.
Great idea.
So stay tuned. But I'm trying to be progressive like you, Steve, like adapt or die.
I'm not progressive. I'm just trying to be.
Oh, you're naturally on the head of the curve, Mr. Scalone, as far as I can tell. Nick, thanks for taking the time out of your cradle journey to come join us. Really appreciate that, my friend.
Well,
and give my love to the beautiful mountains up there.
I will, mate. I will.
And have a great week, everyone. And hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thank you all.
All right.